you've been there from the beginning. And I can barely remember when we were using Skype before Google Meets were a thing, and that was like 2018. But like you were there way before that. How is that technology functioning?
And there's a lot of bullshit out there as well. Don't get me wrong. You have to
Obviously.
look past the self-styled gurus or whatever. But
what advice would you give to your former self before you start on this journey?
I would say just
Let me tell you a fun fact about our podcast. We're at the beginning process and you can have a tremendous influence over our channel. By just liking and subscribing to our channel, you'll help us increase the quality of the videos that we're creating. Also, you'll stay in the loop with the new videos which are coming every week. Thank you and enjoy the episode.
So welcome, Maya. I'm very happy to have you here today. And Maya is one of the OG of this industry. It's one of the first and one of the people who started before this current of digital nomad was popular. So I'm really curious and interested to be able to talk to you today because I haven't had this conversation with anybody before. All the people I know in this industry, they've started around similar times, like maybe five years ago when the COVID started, and then everybody started remotely. So that's something that would be truly interesting to see how you started from the get-go, because now it's popular, everybody's on Instagram, everybody's on social media, and you kind of have this exposure to people who work remotely. But how is it when you started? Like, what was the push that got you to leave the place that you're living in and to decide that I want to work remotely, I want to start my own business, and I want to do this when nobody was doing it?
Well, for me, I started as an employee, and it all came about really when my life changed with the arrival of a millennium baby. At that point, I was working in a university. I had a very solid, safe job. It even came with some childcare provisions, but I couldn't quite reconcile the idea of the baby being in one place and me going to work in another building and all of that happening and being organized enough and stepping out of her life at 6 months. And then I got the opportunity to start work with a new company. It was a new venture from a small research company, and they wanted somebody to develop a new service for them kind of discreetly. And they were looking at where could we accommodate this work. I said, well, I could do it from home. You know, I've got enough space. Hopefully, I didn't know how much space a baby took up at that point, but I thought I can figure it out. We can put a new phone line in, because that's what it meant at that time. Bring in a load of big beige boxes and monitors and printers and everything, and wire it up, and I could build this project from home. And then I suppose we thought in a few years, if it goes well, we'll rent an office somewhere, but that just never happened. And yeah, that was 2000. And I've been working remotely ever since. At a later point, I transitioned to living in another country, to going freelance and all that. But that's where it began, back at the turn of the millennium.
So it began with your opportunity to be able to work remotely. But when was the time when you decided, well, I can work remotely, what if I move to a different country, if I can still do that same thing?
Well, it's quite hard to piece the timeline together and where an idea comes from. I think some of the blame might go to the 4-hour work week, which came out, I think that was initially published around 2005, 2006, and I read it fairly early on, because there was nothing about remote work. You know, nobody was working in that way. There weren't any influencers or Instagram or anything to refer to. I didn't know anybody else who was working like I was, apart from the team that I was growing. And then this book came along, and you know, a lot of the ideas in there were just not applicable to me at all. I had 2 young children at that point. I had a business I certainly couldn't design myself out of. I was very hands-on with it. But the one thing I could do in terms of lifestyle design was think, well, where do I want to live? What are we doing here? At that point, we were living in the suburbs of London, and everybody else, either the mums didn't work, or everybody commuted and just went en masse on a train in the morning. And I didn't really relate to any of them. And it wasn't, there was lots that was right about it. We've moved out of the center of the city to the suburbs because that's what you're supposed to do when you have a family, and that's supposed to be the desirable lifestyle upgrade. But we still weren't happy. And we decided to look further afield. We wanted more of a community environment for our daughters to grow up in. It felt very unsafe, the thought of them being teenagers in London and London suburbs. And so we looked around the UK initially. My husband was from the northeast, and it was too cold up there. We looked at sort of rural Wales, all sorts of places we thought might satisfy what we were looking for, but we realized the outdoor lifestyle we wanted was pointing us out of the UK altogether. And eventually we went on a trip to Spain just for a weekend, and we found ourselves thinking, well, hang on a minute, we love this. Why are we going home to this grey, cold, wet suburb and waving everybody off on the train in the morning? We could live here. We could live here. You know, the technology exists. There's a role for my husband in the business. We could put the girls in Spanish school. Let's give it a try. So we did.
So it's fantastic. Like everything started with a small trip, and then it kind of got corrupted into the idea of like, oh, that could be a long-term strategy.
Yeah, it was. What? We literally saw a guy walking on the beach with a briefcase on the beach in Valencia, and he was just, this was January, and he was just, and it was the first time I think that we'd kind of been somewhere that lovely and really seen people working rather than being in a holiday resort and area that we normally went with the kids. And I think we both looked at each other and just kind of, oh, he's just finished work and he's walking home along the beach.
It's really interesting is that when you're looking for opportunities, something comes your way in ways that you wouldn't imagine before. But if you didn't have the opportunity to work remotely at the time and you just go for a trip, that wouldn't mean anything. It just would be like a weekend trip. But just because you're in that space where that could be possible and we're looking for a way to expand your location, it happens to be an inspiration for you.
Yeah, you start to notice things, but that's what everything's about, right? It's kind of opening yourself up to the opportunities, and then they'll come and you'll see them. They'll get in your line of sight, and you suddenly realize you're both thinking the same thing. Could we? Should we?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's really amazing. But was it difficult from a social standpoint, because you've been living your life in England, and you had all your friends there, family, and everything? So how is that process of disconnected from everything and decided like, oh, we're going to go to a different country and live there?
Oh, everyone thought we were mad. That again, nobody had done this. You know, I think people, I don't know what they thought. Obviously, my business partner, who was my employer, I had to square things away with her first, and she'd already enabled me to work from home, and I managed to persuade them that it was a relatively small step, that I'd take care of all the logistics and technology and everything, and we'd do this. But so that was a business conversation. This is what I need to be happy and fulfilled and productive and keep doing what I'm doing and growing this team. The social and family conversation was much more difficult because there was no precedent for this. And I think everyone thought we were just having some kind of collective breakdown or something. Or you could go and get it out of your system. Don't sell up. Give it a try. We'll see you in 6 months when you're broke and disappointed. And or there were other people who reacted quite strangely, as though we were kind of, when we tried to explain our reasons, it was as though we were judging them or their chosen life. What do you mean it's not safe? What, you know? And that was a very strange reaction, because of course it was nothing to do with them. It was to do with us and what we wanted, and we weren't making any comment about them and their life choices. We simply wanted to get on with our own. And then the other thing, of course, was we had 2 young daughters. We had to try and explain that. We took them on holiday to Spain and they loved it. And then we said, right, you're going to actually spend 1 day of your holiday going to school. And you're going to do a taster day in this lovely school that we found. And they're, what? Imagine this was your school. And that was the start of that conversation. So yeah, there were lots of tricky things to discuss with people around us. And we did have to approach the whole thing on very much a trial basis. We rented both ends. We thought, we'll give this a go. Worst case scenario, we've had a brilliant adventure. The girls have had some language immersion that they would never get in the UK. And we'll have something to talk about when we get back. But of course, we never went back.
Yeah, it takes a strength of character and be able to make a move that nobody else made before, because even if it's the most brilliant move that you can imagine, there's also going to be some resistance from people, because it's a change, it's something new, and then people are afraid of something new, and even something better, a lot better than you had before, but it's still something new, and there's like natural resistance to a positive change.
Yes, change always has friction associated with it. Honestly, it brings enough of its own. You don't really need other people's baggage along the way when you've got to pack enough of your own. And of course, even just packing up the business at that point meant huge amounts of work and containers. So we were managing all sorts of different questions and things. it's one of those things that we often looked at each other and said, God, if we'd known what we were taking on here, would we have even gone down this route if we'd known how complicated it would be to move the cat or to sort out the tax and deal with the technology in different countries. But of course, you get to a point where the momentum of the project, you're kind of committed and you might as well see it through. And yeah, if we could just get, I mean, we literally, there will be a book one day about that. It's all written down somewhere, but 2 days before our channel crossing, the gearbox dropped out of our car. It was just, you couldn't make it up. All these obstacles, the universe was just hurling in our way to test us. But yeah, eventually somehow we got to Spain.
I feel like sometimes it's a good if you don't know all the challenges ahead, because that would be overwhelming for you, and just like make the decision and get there like, oh, I didn't expect that, but like I'm already here, like I might as well just get it.
Absolutely. You've got to have an agile approach to these things. What's the next thing to deal with? Right. Okay, let's line that up. What are we going to deal with this week? Just if you could see the whole project out in front of you, you would just go and curl up under the desk somewhere and never move and never do anything. But that's life, isn't it?
It's a very interesting balance, because you don't want to be naive about the things that you're going to do, but like also you don't want to know too much about it, or because it's gonna be off-putting. It's like, oh, this is too complicated for me. So you have to be in that balance with your wishful thinking, but in the same note, kind of like trust yourself that you're going to get over whatever is going to happen. In no way it's going to move forward.
Oh, 100%. And, a lot of the same challenges that you deal with in life, in business, if you knew when you were starting a business, if you knew when you're starting a family, all the challenges that are going to come your way, you just have this big picture vision and you want the objectives and what that's hopefully going to bring your way ultimately. And you figure out the details as you go along.
Yeah, I feel like almost every of my friends who have kids has told me the same story, that if you knew before how complicated it's going to be, they wouldn't have had them. But now they're happy, they're glad they had them.
Yes, absolutely. The human race would grind to a halt if anyone had any idea.
Yeah. So you one thing that I'm curious about, did you manage to corrupt everybody from your old environment to say like, oh, I can do that, maybe I can do that as well? Did that happen?
No, not very many at all. The vast majority of people who I left behind in the UK as friends and family are still living their lives, and they're perfectly happy. Our control group is going along nicely, and we are living our lives. Again, there was absolutely nothing in what we were doing that was any kind of statement or judgment about anybody else. Since that time, I've helped a lot more people who I don't know to make a similar kind of transition, and it's wonderful when people are ready for that. Then I can use my experiences to help them, to maybe help them avoid some of the mistakes we made, to help them take advantage of the opportunities that are out there. But it's such an individual and personal thing. I would never say to anybody, oh, you must leave. I mean, you have these conversations like around Brexit and things like that, and people must get out. At the moment, we're hearing a lot more from people in the US. And if there's anything that I can do personally, or as Remote Work Europe we can do to help smooth that path, God, it's so much easier now with the technology and the visas and everything else. So it's like, yeah, come on, come on over. I'll do whatever I can to support you and help you. But I'm not going to pretend that it's super easy and you just click your fingers and go. I even know people who've been part of corporate relocations where they've done everything for them, sent a huge van and sent people to pack their stuff up and move it to another country. And it's still a massive upheaval, and it's still not right for everybody. So you have to approach it with a real sense of adventure, I think, and what you want to gain from it. And it's not going to be right for everybody.
Absolutely. I think that was a conclusion I had as well, that it's lifestyle that works really great for some people, but not for everybody. It's not like a model that everybody can implement into their life and it's going to have the same level of satisfaction that we have. Something interesting you mentioned is that you managed to help more people outside of your initial network as opposed to people from your network. And I think that you mentioned before that when you went to Spain, you already had this mindset that if you met somebody like you, would kind of push in that direction, that you're already kind of towards that, for the direction in which you already want to do this. And then I think that it's more easier to meet people that already have this back in their minds, and then push them in the right direction as opposed to people who are very settled into one space.
Yeah, when we first moved to Spain, most of I hate the word expat, but it is the right word, the British migrant community There weren't really remote workers around then, but there were quite a lot of entrepreneurs because there were small businesses. People had come over to maybe open a restaurant or something like that. And so we related to some of those people. And eventually I ended up going full-time freelance about 7 years ago. But at that point, a lot of my work was with companies who were not in Spain, because just in terms of professional competence, I'm a writer whose first language is English. I can't write professionally in Spanish. I can get by in a restaurant, but you wouldn't hire me to write or be a journalist in Spanish. And the companies I was consulting with about moving to remote work, they tended to be, a lot of them were in the US, and they wanted to have teams distributed globally, but the first language of the internet has always been English, I suppose. So that was easier. Now, of course, there are remote workers everywhere, and it's wonderful to see people being able to choose to come and live in those small communities and bring the work with them, bring the income with them, and to see how communities are starting to respond to that. It is a slow process, but the world's getting smaller all the time, and we only just realized we'd been in the same webinar earlier this year, because the world of us people doing this work to help other people is even smaller. But again, it's growing all the time, and our reach is growing, and our effectiveness and the number of people we can help. So I think that can only continue to improve.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And, I wanted to kind of dive into the social aspect as well, because you moved to a different location where I presume that you didn't know anybody. So you move from a location where you have your own environment, you have your friends, family, and then you have a degree of social interaction, and then you move to a new country where you don't know anybody. And that was, again, I want to mention, because it's odd to me, that was before internet, before social media, before you had Facebook group, before you have all those apps you can meet people. It's just in the middle of a new community, and you start to make friends. How was the social environment before social media?
Well, it was just kind of, how did you meet anyone before social media? We did actually sometimes communicate with other humans. I suppose we chose the place that we moved to because we chose the school first. It seemed to us that the most important thing was to minimize the disruption for our daughters, especially if it turned out to be temporary. So we were going to put them into a British school. Worst case scenario, we can slot them straight back in where they left off a year later if we needed to. So that's how we chose the town. And it turned out to be a very British resort, because it was a small town and it had 2 international schools in it. I suppose that shouldn't have been a surprise. But that community is very good at networking new people in. It can be extremely transient. In some ways, it's very different from the current digital nomad communities, but it had a lot of things in common, in that people come and go. There are very established networks for welcoming new people and onboarding new people, bringing them in to quickly get them involved in social things and absorbed. And so that was really helpful. Then when we decided we were staying, we moved to another town nearby. We put our daughters into Spanish school. That was much harder in some ways. It felt like even more of a move culturally, because the Spanish communities were very, very strongly established. I mean, most of the parents had been to that school. They just weren't used to people coming in halfway through, and it was harder there to kind of penetrate and make friends. And it was way more than a language barrier. It was a significant cultural one. But, we've managed to reach a point now. We've moved around quite a lot as well, where we're certainly not nomadic, but we've moved around Spain a fair bit. And where we're established now, there's a strong international community, but it's not an expat ghetto by any means. And, our daughters have grown up with a mixture of Spanish and English friends, and so have we. And as you say, it is easier now. There are networks. And when we moved to this area that we are now, there was already the Facebook groups and everything else that you can just jump in and say, okay, how do I find someone to do the plumbing, or those are the things that immediately connect you in with, hey, I'm new. Where do people go for coffee? What do we do? And you can build on those networks. And so all of that exists. It is very, very different. But I think, it's hard for anybody making friends, meeting new people. Sometimes I feel like that gets harder just as you get older. It's easier for the kids that we put in school at 5 years old. They just walk up and say, what's your name? Will you be my friend? We don't know how to do that as grown-ups, do we, so much? Maybe we can do it on social media more easily.
I will take a quick break from this show and talk about a real powerful tool. It would only take 20 seconds and then we'll get right back. System.io is an all-in-one marketing platform that comes with email marketing funnel, building website, membership site management, and a lot of automation capabilities. Traditionally, if you want to build a website, you'd have to integrate and pay for a lot of additional tools, but System.io brings everything that you need in one powerful dashboard. You can start for free, give it a go, and discover all these capabilities mixed into one platform. Check the link in the description to get started. And now, let's get back.
Yeah, I've actually read a lot into this, and one of the reasons for which kids seems to be make more friends more easily because they have a lower sense of identity, and then they're more or less the same. And adults, they kind of grow in their own different direction, and then kind of become more individualistic and more different from one to another. I think that makes it more difficult.
That makes
I think
a lot of sense. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
One of the perks of being a digital nomad is that it kind of pushes you to be social. You can't just stay around and have the same group of friends because you don't have that group of friends anymore. So you have to talk to some people and you have to engage with strangers. And then that's practice. And, it's interesting that most people think that social skills are just something that you have, but it's not. It's something that you have to practice over and over again.
Yeah, definitely. And just making those new connections. And I also think, this is maybe a little bit off topic, but the way the world has changed to become so polarized, or I don't know if it's me getting older and grumpier, but I feel like I have a higher bar and filter now. And it's kind of almost like I don't want to invest in a friendship with somebody I've got nothing in common with, or we might have totally different views. I think it's easier at different stages in your life to accept that these friends come with that job or with those kids' parents or whatever, and you kind of hang out with them because they're there, and you don't realize that you actually have very different views about big things that matter. And my husband's got very good at, when he meets somebody new, he will get them sounded out on all the things that matter. We will cover Brexit, Trump, vaccine denial, whatever, everything in one pint. And they would like, because what's the point in me investing in being friends with this person if we have worldviews that are utterly incompatible, and there's no point kind of spending any time talking to them. And sometimes I have to say, look, you're not auditioning a soulmate here. This is just somebody to maybe watch the football with. Maybe you do have different views. It doesn't mean, but I think the world's got so polarized now that there are people that, look at what's happening in the US. It's almost like two different species who will never date or speak to each other or interact, and they're growing in such different directions. It's a danger that we all end up with people who don't challenge us, don't sort of make us ask questions. And maybe that's the refreshing thing about being in a community that does change and evolve, is that you do have to kind of get to know new people and sound them out a little bit, ask them questions. Don't assume that they have the same views as you, the same way of relating to the world. It's just a bit of a shock when you find out down the line. I remember that was some sort of the mummy friends that came with the parenting groups or something, and you suddenly, like months later, a homophobic joke or something like that, and you think, whoa, okay, I thought I knew this person, and actually I don't relate to them at all, and that's the end of that friendship. And it's there's a constant process of deepening relationships, passing in and out of them. Friends who stay with you forever, wherever you go in the world, they're really important too. And you appreciate those more when you move around a bit, I think. The ones that it's just brilliant to just pick up with and have a call with anywhere in the world, even if the last time was a couple of years ago that you actually sat down together. So you value those friends even more as well. The bigger the networks get and the loose ties, the more you value the close ones, I think. And that includes family members too.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And you mentioned a few points there that I want to kind of point at. One of them is when I pick friends, I don't necessarily look for their political views or any other views. I look whatever they are open-minded to be able to see the other parts of the arguments. And I was looking very recently on the debates from the political spectrum in the US. One thing that makes me a bit sad is that every party is keen to destroy the other party and say how they are stupid. They're not trying to understand them at all. They just everybody trying to argument against the other, how they are right and the other one is wrong. And I was like, this is not a great way to to have a functional society. It's like we have to have conversation between disagreement points of view, and then be able to understand the other person. And this is how you grow and evolve, because everybody has points of view that probably they will change over time. So if you have the ability to talk to people, it's like, okay, I'm trying to understand what this person is saying, even if I think I disagree with the person, but I need at least to understand where they're coming from. I think this is the basic of a understanding of arguments.
Mm-hmm.
So I do have a degree of friends that we disagree on some issues, but we still sit down and talk about it openly, and we're trying to understand the other point and try to have a conversation about it. I think that's the great part about it. It's about, for me, when I look for friends, I look for people who are more open-minded and they are willing to talk about something they disagree with. That's my best practice when I meet new people.
Yeah, it's a challenge because there are some views I think, well, I could never bridge that gap. We're never going to meet in the middle. We're never going to find anything in common. But I think it's then very easy with the world we live in today that you can always find people who exactly mirror your own opinions and never challenge them and never develop them. And so you need to work around those edges, and you need to challenge yourself to connect with people who are on the periphery of your own social circles or business circles or whatever, just to keep growing and keep evolving, because we can all find our tribes of comfort online, and people who will never have a difficult conversation with, never push us to learn and grow and develop our ideas, or want to think, oh, that's interesting, but I need to learn more about that before I can have an informed opinion about that subject. And yeah, there is a danger now that we can all connect so easily with people online that we can maybe find it easier to do that than relate to the people that we meet every day. And as remote workers, as people who travel, as digital nomads, then perhaps we have more of a responsibility to make an effort with those face-to-face connections.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a big fan of face-to-face connection. One of them because I'm terrible at texting, and I know that I know that my assets slide into my personal charisma, and which is face-to-face. So I try as much as possible not to text with people, because I know I'm going to ruin my chances to meet them in the first place.
So I love the way that it's evolved. I'm really introverted, and for me, it's I like being able to keep the conversation really fluid and move through different mediums. Even if I see somebody once every 5 years or something, that's brilliant. But we'll keep the relationship alive digitally in between times. Then that's great too.
I mean, it's great. It's an environment that helps different types of people communicate differently. So for something that works really well with somebody, doesn't work for somebody else. So it's great that people can find their own ways of communicating. I think that's a really great way. Yeah, so it's interesting how the social spectrum evolved as a digital nomad. And I want to talk just a bit about how did the remote working feeling, and also the technology, and also the approach to remote work have changed during the years, because you've been there from the beginning. And I can barely remember when we were using Skype before Google Meets were a thing, and that was like 2018. But like you were there way before that. How is that technology functioning? You just had emails and letters, I presume.
We had phones at the very beginning. You had to unplug the phone to plug in the internet to get your email when I started. So we literally unplugged the phone line, plugged in the modem, which screamed, and then your emails came down, and then you plug the phone back in to phone someone and say, hey, I sent you an email. You get it? We sent each other faxes, which were this strange curly paper. Yeah, obviously that was the earliest days. A lot of work. If I had to transfer a big file up to my parent company's office in central London, I burned it onto a floppy disk and sent that on a courier, or onto a CD-ROM if it was a big file like a presentation or something. There was no way to transfer things digitally. Also, a lot of the other things that we did day to day in business, you couldn't do digitally either. I used to go to the bank and the post office or the travel agent to do all these things, which are now just an app. And it was very different. But I think one of the ways we got through it was just by being a constant early adopter and being a geek and really nerdy about the technology as it evolved. So as soon as we had any kind of always on broadband, that was great. It meant that we could just be in touch with people. Emails arrived when they were sent, or fairly soon after, depending on sort of how fast the connection was. We had the earliest direct messaging we had was something called ICQ, which gamers used, which was limited to really short text messages. Then we had MSN Messenger, got our very first emojis, which are very few, but you could use them. You could even use them for status indicators, like when I was on maternity leave and things, or I was feeding the baby so I couldn't get at my keyboard, but I could read. I had like a fruit or something, because there weren't many emojis to choose from then. And Skype came along, which gave you calls as well as text. So we moved our main business communications to Skype at that point. And then eventually Slack, when, you know, it was always a case of, well, what's out there? What's new? What are people talking about? Can we try it? Let's jump in there, dragging my poor team from one app to another, because I could see that things were getting better all the time and that the potential was opening up. And yeah, Skype was amazing for years. And it's a shame in a way that the brand has got lost. It was an amazing sort of Estonian pioneer, because I'm now an Estonian resident. But, you know, somebody made lots of money for it, and then Microsoft just swallowed it up. And the weird thing happened during the pandemic was that Zoom became the verb. And it just kind of seized the market share amongst the people who hadn't been communicating digitally as a team conversation beforehand. So these things are continually changing, and who knows? I mean, I feel that what we've got here now, we're on Google Meet at the moment, certainly for one-to-one, it doesn't really need to get better than this. You know, it's like you're just there through the screen. We're talking face to face. We're recording this for other people, but in terms of our direct communication, we don't need anything more than this, right? With small groups, it works very well too. One-to-many, bigger groups, yeah, things can continue to evolve. And I think the more bandwidth we get, the more connectivity, the better devices and screens get, it reduces the latency that just reminds your brain that it's not quite real. And it improves all the time to the point that it really is just somebody sitting the other side of your screen that you're simply chatting to, and the illusion is perfect. Your brain is fooled completely.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I remember when I was a kid, it was using like floppy disk and Yahoo Messenger and all of stuff. But yeah, I never used them for work. Just kind of like transfer files and game between the kids, you know, just move around. But like, I'm interested about this. How did you feel when the technology started to progress more rapidly during the lockdown? It was like a positive note for you, or did you feel like now you're required to do a lot more things than before?
It's interesting. I mean, for me personally, my work didn't change that much. I was mostly working in technology journalism at that time. So I was in Spain. Most of the brands and businesses I was talking to were in the US. I was therefore already interviewing them on Zoom. What changed was interesting that they were at home at that point. And in some ways it made journalism easier and better, because that kind of, you immediately had an icebreaker that instead of them being in the office with their PR person and their comms person and trying not to say anything not on the press release, they're sitting at home, even if the PR's also on the call, and then the toddler climbs on their lap or something like that. It's a very good way of connecting one human to another. So that work continued. The work I was doing with teams about transitioning to remote work, that all kind of fell apart because people didn't want consultants and project management anymore. It was just obviously grab a laptop and go home, we'll figure out the details later. So I did do some work with teams, but then coming out of that, I started to get a lot more inquiries and connections, and just trying to help people in my own circles and communities, was working with the individual workers as well. How do you do this all day, Maya? I've had such a terrible time. I've been in 19 hours of Zoom meetings today, you know, my eyes are blurred. I was like, that's not how you do it. Trying to support individuals. So I started writing the Healthy Happy Homeworking books and blog, which it was a series of 2 books in the end. I think the backlash against working from home that grew out of actually because people had to stay at home, and that was not a positive thing. And as we started to come out of the lockdown period, I started to get lots of inquiries from people who wanted to know about remote working more broadly, and people who were maybe being called back to an office they'd hoped they'd never have to see again, people who were asking about remote work in the wrong way, in the wrong place, and things like that. So I thought, okay, I'll gather them up into a community, and that's where Remote Work Spain came about, because that's where most of my community was, and people asking the questions, like in their local village Facebook group, does anyone know about any home working jobs? Thinking, no, that's not how you find a remote job. All right, let's gather up these people. And that continued to grow and snowball. And eventually we had lots of people joining from outside of Spain saying, well, what about self-employment laws in Belgium or Italy or something? I haven't got a clue. So then we grew sideways into Remote Work Europe and started to add these different satellite communities. And we're now active in about 15 countries because it's still really fragmented, right? Certainly on the regulatory front, the technology is very unified. The social acceptance is fairly steady, but on the regulation front, money, tax, logistics, policies at the local level, that's still all over the place. We're a long way off the kind of unified, truly borderless business that I would love us to have one day. That's still very much a work in progress. And there are people still really struggling to figure out their lifestyle design, going right back to Mr. Ferris back in the day. People who don't realize what choices they truly have now. And the more people I can help to just get over that initial stage of separating the way you earn the living from a place that somebody else gets to choose, once you unlock that, all the other stuff can come into it. Well, where do I want to live? What kind of lifestyle? What kind of family life? What kind of home? Do I want to travel? Do I want to stay in one place? Do I want to go back to my roots? Do I want to see the world? All of those other questions come in later on. So it's just helping people make that initial step really into their first employed remote role or to something more flexible. We get a lot of people coming to us initially saying, help me find a remote job. But the solution for a lot of people is not going to be a job. It's going to be something more blended, more portfolio based. It might be some consulting, some freelancing, a fractional role here, an interim there. But once you do that, then you have a choice to live somewhere maybe with a lower cost of living. So you can work fewer hours, or you can study, you can retrain, you can build something for yourself. It's getting people out of this kind of 9-to-5 mindset paradigm. Then the whole world's at their feet. And it's really exciting. I love being able to help people with that.
I'll interrupt you for a second to tell you about the Mindfulness Mastery, a book created alongside my business partner Dina. This is a great workbook that will help you understand yourself better, create personalized goals, and keep track of your progress. If you want to start your progression path and improve your life, this workbook will help you and offer the tools you need. It's best to order a hard copy as it has a lot of fun exercise within and daily tasks so you can make small progression towards achieving a fulfilling life. You can find it on Amazon, so check the link in the description to get your copy.
But how did you feel when you had an increased numbers of people doing the same thing that you do? And I'm asking from a professional perspective as well. Like, you're one of the kind when you started. Like, nobody's doing that, and you feel a bit special, I presume, at the beginning. And then all of a sudden, everybody's doing the same thing. Did you feel like it was taken away from your experience, or did you feel happy that more people were embracing this lifestyle?
Look, we're still so early. We're still such a small number, honestly, compared to the people out there who need to have what we have. There is still so much work to do and not enough of us doing it. I mean, yes, I think it's hilarious when people hit me up in their DMs saying they want to coach me to be a digital nomad or a remote worker or something, because they've been doing it for 5 years. It's like, okay, well, maybe look at my profile a little bit more and you'll realize I'm not in your target market. But good luck, because there are people that you will be able to help, and you will be able to, it's very easy to think that you have to be an expert at everything in order to help anyone at all. Whereas we can all learn so much from people who are maybe closer to where we are now, but they're one step ahead and they've taken that step more recently. It's harder for me. I mean, I love your questions at the top of this call, reflecting on my motivations back 25 years ago, what that process was like and the conversations I had, because they're a long time ago for me now. And they took place in another world. Somebody having that conversation today, it will be very different because the whole social context has changed so much. So, it's more likely that somebody who's been through that transition more recently can help that person better than I can with that conversation. So there's so much room for us all to help each other. And everything that we do, your podcast, my website, all these things are part of such a rising tide. And certainly for me, I've reached the point now as a writer and consultant that I can pick and choose the clients I work with who are also part of that conversation. And that's where I can add the most value. And so, I can amplify the client work I'm doing across the Remote Work Europe networks and things, because it all adds to this acceptance and movement for remote work, because we are still so early. Most people have not got what we've got. They have no clue how to make that transition. So each little bit of the jigsaw that we can put in place, the seeds that we can sow, it's certainly not a case of us encroaching on each other's space and so on. I see some people who kind of think, oh, branding looks a bit familiar, or what you're trying to do. But actually, there's enough people out there, really, that different people are going to resonate with different kinds of messaging, different kinds of consulting. I don't do much one-to-one individual work because it's better for me now to use my voice one-to-many and try and reach more people. So if there are people who want to do individual coaching and they've got 3 years experience or whatever, that's fine, because they can definitely help people, right? I think there is a little bit of a kind of almost like a pyramid scheme of the best way to be a digital nomad is to help other people be a digital nomad, is to help other people and sell courses on, and that is a bit icky. So I've just tried to step back from some of that and think, okay, well, yeah, I'll put what I know into products, into courses. Some of those are premium products people have to pay for, because I can't write a book and give it away for free, or develop a training course. But I actually give away a huge amount of what I know for free in conversations like this, on our own website, on our own podcast. So I'll continue to put that out into the world, because you don't know who it's going to reach when and what they need at different points. So there's enough for us all to go around, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's something very interesting that you mentioned, which is that you don't necessarily have to be an expert in the field. It just be one step ahead of the curve. And I think that's truly remarkable, because a lot of people have a degree of insecurity. It's like, I don't feel like an expert. I don't feel like I know enough to be able to teach other people. But the truth is that you don't need that much. You just need a little bit more. I'm by no means an expert in chess, but like I can teach people how to move the pieces, and that would be a tremendous help for somebody who doesn't know that.
Absolutely. And whereas if they asked a grandmaster for help, they'd get help that's so kind of erudite and way over their head that probably wouldn't be useful at all. And the world is changing so fast. We all have to keep learning. And if you learn one thing that you can share with others, then you're part of that process. I mean, one of the biggest changes, because I've always been a nerd, is generative AI, which I've been massively immersing myself in over the last year or so, trying to keep up with it. And nobody's an expert on that. Nobody can say I've been an expert in this for 10 years, because they're lying. And all it is people who figured one thing out, and they're sharing it, and they're iterating on it, and they're getting feedback from the people they're helping, and they're growing, and they're learning, and they're trying to translate how these tools are going to change the way that we work and the way that we communicate. And we're all so new in this, that we have to be a little bit humble. We have to recognize that there aren't any great experts here. Nobody's got some elevated viewpoint, and if they are, they're probably developing it, and that's not going to help most people. It's the bits in the middle where we have to communicate what we're learning and share and amplify. That's what's changing the world, and the future isn't written yet. We get to choose it, we get to figure it out, and we can all do that as we go along. And if you learn one thing and you can share it with somebody else, you're part of the solution. So everybody has something to teach me, to teach everybody else.
That's a really tricky point. I really love that we can help each other in every other way. And you don't necessarily have to be an expert in the field, or like have to have a title that says like I know what I'm talking about. Just a bit of additional information to what I already know is going to be a massive benefit for myself, just because of something I don't.
Yeah, we all have our expertise and our lived experience and it's so easy to share that now, to put it out into the world. And there's a lot of bullshit out there as well, don't get me wrong. You have to look past the self-styled gurus or whatever, but generally the people you can learn the most from are the people who are a little bit more humble about it and don't necessarily shout it from the rooftops.
Yeah, very interesting. And I want to ask another question. It's a bit from a different topic, but I've been thinking about it a lot recently, because I had a lot of conversation with my friends. And I don't want to put a label on you, but you're like a remote worker. You're not like digital nomads in this own sense. You're more like a slow matter person who decides to find their own location and stay there and work from there, as opposed to just moving from one place to another. But now it's a big trend of people chasing the next shiny thing in terms of traveling. You just stay in a place for a couple of weeks, maybe a few months, and then they move to the next thing, and then they have kind of a degree of shallow experience of the place. Even if you stay there for a couple of months, you're still not going to have the genuine experience of it. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's room for everybody. There are people who insist that, oh, you're not a proper remote worker if you work from home. Well, that's rubbish. It's about the choice. It's about intentionality, and it's about knowing what you need, what you want from life. And there's room for all sorts of approaches. There's also room for change within that. I know a lot of people who've done the digital nomad thing, particularly coming out of lockdown, and it's like, yeah, well, I want to be somewhere different every month. But then after a couple of years, they actually get a bit burned out by that. And maybe they want to have a base that they travel from regularly. I mean, I love the fact that I can travel to events and different communities and connect with people and then come back to my home. And I've always traveled with my work and my business, but when my daughters were younger, I tended to travel just very tactically, and I'd go to a conference for 3 days and come home again because I didn't want to be an absent parent. Whereas now they're adults doing their own thing. I can say, well, actually, I'll go for a few weeks instead of a couple of days. Or maybe my husband and I both go and we'll rent a car and we'll spend a bit of time hanging out in a new place because we can. And for me, I love my home. We bought a home in Valencia now. Certainly the recent events in our own community, the devastation caused by the floods, has reminded me very strongly that this is my home and this is my community that's directly affected by that. And there are things that test us in our life which put that label of where is your home, where is your heart? And I know some people are very happy to go through years without having that place. For me, it's always been where my family is, where my immediate nuclear family is. And I very quickly, when we first moved to Spain, and I used to go back to the UK on business, and then I would go home to Spain, and I knew I was going home to where my girls were. And that I felt that very strongly. And there were other tests, like Brexit was one of them. There were people who I'd known for years, Brits in Spain, who I very much in my head put in the immigrant category rather than the expat. And suddenly they were like packing. And it was like, whoa, okay, so this was just a holiday or what for the last 10 years? Bye. Lockdown again. For us, it made no sense to do anything other than hunker down exactly where we were, whereas other people were running for the airport because clearly their emotional home was somewhere different than where they were at that point that situation found them. And again, that kind of divided people, I suppose. And it's not until you have those emotional tests of what home means to you that you really kind of bother to define it, I think, because otherwise it's just somewhere that your stuff is or whatever. But your emotional relationship with home can change over time, and certainly if you have a family or dependents, pets, some people might relate to possessions and where all their things are as their place. I don't know. I think it's something that you know in your heart. And there are people who are very happy to say, my home is in this backpack and I'll take it to my next destination. And as soon as I unpack, then that's where I am. That's home. And it might be for a couple of weeks or it might be for a couple of years, but then I'll move that on again. For me right here, it's now it's this home. But I still love to travel, and I love the fact that I can use it as a base to get anywhere in Europe very easily. The rest of the world isn't much further, and I love to travel, and then I love to come home again.
That's a really interesting concept, and it sounds might not be the best comparison, but it sounds like going to the open buffet when you have everything available, and then you're gonna try a new food for so many times until like, okay, I like X or that Y, and I like that, and those are my things, and then it's like I'm not gonna touch anything else because you know your thing. I think it's the same.
You
with
still
travel.
have your favorites, right?
Yeah. I think it's the same with traveling. I think you mentioned very well because there are so people traveling from one place to another. But at some point, there are so many places you can go, and then you realize that you like some places more than others. So like, oh, I could have a base somewhere, as opposed to just running around from one place to another, as you mentioned as well. I think it's a communal trend between nomads, but it takes different amounts of time for people to find the base. That's something I found very interesting.
Or even to admit that they want one. I think there can be a little bit of a kind of, I'll never settle. There's still like 17 countries I've not been to or whatever. And it's like,
I think it's a fear of attachment. It might be a fear of attachments there, as opposed to just like they don't like the place. Like I don't want to feel like home, or like I don't want to kind of be attached to a place.
Yeah, and it's a commitment. It's like a marriage or a business partnership or whatever. You have to make yourself a bit vulnerable to commit, and that has a cost. emotionally, practically, financially, whatever. There's lots of different ways of measuring it. And it's a risk that you take. And it in some ways, it could be easier to drift through life without any of those attachments and just completely self-contained and individual. But when you do invest in a home or a relationship or a business, the rewards can be great, and everybody's sort of balance of those personal comfort levels of risk and reward will be individual, I suppose, and there will also be dynamic. They can often evolve over time.
That's a good point. So do you feel like the digital nomad have a degree of responsibility for the place they're living in?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, it really depends on how people see themselves. I know that it's funny, I don't have a lot of digital nomad friends where I live. I don't seek out those communities. I'm not really interested in them. I know that there's a big digital nomad community in Valencia. I know a lot of them, they're down on the beach playing volleyball or going to meetups or whatever. I don't get involved in that because I have my friends here and my life here. If somebody reaches out to me, I'll do my best to help them, but I don't seek out those communities. And so I don't know to what extent they're involved in things like the cleanup after the floods, the fundraising, and so on. I do know that there are digital nomad communities who make a very distinct effort to put back into the world. There are events which make a particular effort to involve local communities. There are things like conferences and festivals which bring together digital nomads from all over the world, but they will have a specific discount or even free rate to involve local people who want to access that lifestyle information and so on. So I think it's a very individual thing. There are tourists all over the world who don't have any thought about the local communities they're in. And digital nomads can be the same. They can drift through, not really contributing socially, economically, or in any other way to the places that they're passing through because they see them as passing through. Whereas I know other people who've started projects, initiatives, who've trained local people, who've taken part in skill shares and fundraising, direct relief efforts to really contribute to the places that they're living in. I'm sure it's just a sort of mental thing of, am I visiting here? Do I live here? Do I feel I owe this community anything? And I hope that more and more people will start to see that they can be more interdependent. And actually, you can get so much more out of a visit to a place if you make some personal connections, if you give a little bit back, if you talk to local people, find out what's needed in the community, find out ways that you can personally contribute and support what's going on. I'm sure you're going to have a better time than any tourist passing through.
So you feel like even though there are multiple models of life, it would be better if you acquire the sense of responsibility when you're going to a new place. Even though as a digital nomad, if you're going to be there for a couple of months, it'll be good for your experience in place.
I think we are facing a backlash now against remote workers and digital nomads. We're finding it particularly in Europe when it comes to housing and things like that. It's very easy to say these people are completely extractive and exploitative. They come here, they skyrocket our rents, they live in these small enclaves or co-livings, they only want to buy international food and brands and they don't really give back and contribute. If we want to be responsible citizens of the world, which we should be able to be as people who are well-traveled, who are in international businesses, I feel that we need to be positive ambassadors of that lifestyle and movement. And even if we're only going to be somewhere a short time, we might not be able to integrate fully with the local community, but we don't have to exploit it either. We can still contribute positively and look at what we're doing, even if it's to spend into the local economy, to talk to the person serving you coffee. Maybe they're not that different from you, but they don't know what you're doing to earn on your laptop while they're making coffee at the bar. Maybe there are things you can help them with. What do they want out of life? And maybe you could talk about what you're doing. Maybe there's some way for them to extend their possibilities. And maybe they never want to leave that village, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't know what's out there and what opportunities could be available for them. Some of us could be better ambassadors, I think. There's often been a history of wealthy Western people going to parts of the world because, and maybe this is all down to Tim Ferriss again, exploiting the geo-arbitrage of currency. Well, I can go and live for a few cents in Asia or wherever. And that immediately creates a barrier with the communities you're living in. And it's going to mean that you only go to Starbucks or McDonald's or wherever where you can expect to get. It's like home, but it's just so much cheaper. Whereas if you approach it differently, well, yes, I can maybe live more flexibly here, but maybe I can live like local people do. Maybe I can help in a local school. Maybe I can do something for the environment to offset all my air miles, carbon. There are so many ways to give back. And there are organizations there that can help you do it. So just reach out to, all the different charities and networks and groups that are set up around the world. It's very easy. And also reach out to the communities in different places which are established for remote workers, because they will know, well, this place needs their dogs walking, or you can do a beach cleanup here, or you can do that. There are lots of ways. You don't have to commit long term, and you could just do something a little bit generous, even while you're passing through a new area, if you really want to.
Yeah, I feel like if you want to have the best experience within an environment, you need to get involved in that way, so we can understand better how people think and how people feel. Like one of the best things we can do is to buy the local products. That could be just to have a sense of how people live there, and then you'll understand better. And I think you mentioned very, very nicely, it's like volunteer is a good thing for just understanding how people live, what's the lifestyle, and how you'll see a part of life that you wouldn't have seen before, from a hotel room or from your nice apartment on the beach.
Because you might as well stay at home, right, and do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a degree of insensitive to the best life, but I think if you're on a my point is, I don't like to be a tourist in a place, because I don't like to go to the cliche place. For example, if I go to Paris, I'm just going to go to Eiffel Tower and take a picture there. But it's more like, if I want to have a grounded experience into the place, it's better to consume local products and to volunteer, as I mentioned as well.
Yes, and ask where is the best place to get a coffee and people watch in Paris. So it'd be a long way from the main drag, and you'll probably get a nicer coffee. It'll cost you less, and you'll have some interesting conversations while you're there.
Absolutely. A last question for this, the closing question. It's a question I ask to all my guests, so I'm curious about your experience as well, because it's more long term. We kind of tap into it as well, but what advice would you give to your former self before you start on the journey of moving away from home and being a fully remote worker?
Yeah, that is obviously going back a bit, as you know from our conversation. I mean, yeah, I would say just hang on. It will all work out in the end. There are changes coming that you've got no clue about, but follow your instincts, and just keep talking it through, keep testing your ideas, keep to your convictions, but be open to new ideas, and you never know what opportunities are out there for you. When I first left the UK for Spain, I took a job with me, which in some ways, looking back, I could see I wasn't entirely happy with, but I felt that changing the context would make it okay. And the huge benefit of being able to work remotely was very hard to consider giving up. Maybe even at that point, I should have been looking at wanting to do something more entrepreneurial, more flexible on my own terms. So I think advice I would give to myself is, just be open to whatever opportunities come along, to wherever you can make a difference, where you can contribute, and what that might lead to, because you can't see these opportunities if your mind is closed to them. You might miss out, and you're only going to pass through a place once on that particular journey and that particular river. So just open your mind to anything and see what comes your way. And that's, I don't think I would have been closed-minded to that advice, but I don't think I had any idea what it might open up for me either. And I would just like more and more people to embrace that, really, and see where life takes them.
That's a great advice. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation and explore how things were back in the day. And I hope to see you soon.